everybody. I want to start tonight by taking you back to 1999. The place is Fort Sill, Oklahoma, home of the Field Artillery, also home of the United States Army Field Artillery Training Center. And I want to take you to one of the barracks there. And in that barracks, in that large classroom, are sitting 250 young men and women. These young men and women have been in the Army exactly 2 weeks. For 2 weeks, they've been yelled at, screamed at, chased around. They've been put down, harassed, told what time to get up, what time to go to bed. They've been made to do countless push-ups. They've been made to crawl in the mud. They've done the dying cockroach. Do you know what the dying cockroach is? That's when you have to lay on your back with your arms and legs straight up in the air for long periods of time. At this point, these young men and women are at their lowest point in morale. Their spirits are bad. They're starting to question their decision to come into the Army. Their hygiene is at its lowest point. Suddenly they're called to the position of attention. There they stand, stiff and straight. And out on the stage walks a man, somewhat overweight, who reminds them vaguely of a cross between their fathers and Brad Pitt. That wasn't a joke. Anyways, that man was me. I was their battalion commander. That was my final assignment when I was in the Army, finishing my 28 years. And what I did for 50 minutes with those young men and women was, I told them that somebody did care about them. I told them that they could make it, that they could do it. And you know what? Something amazing started to happen. All of a sudden, that battalion, 1st Battalion, 40th Field Artillery, we started to have the highest graduation rate. We started to have the lowest dropout rate. And all of a sudden, and maybe this was the best of all, we had the fewest suicide attempts. And by the way, I don't know how much you know about the military, but I hope you'll believe me when I tell you, we have a problem with that. And why? Why? Because I had made some kind of a connection beyond the years. I don't know what it was. I can't really explain it. But as I was trying to put this lecture together tonight, I thought, connections matter. And in fact, I'm going to talk about 3 things that matter. I started out and I thought, well, I talk to my students all the time about the 3 pillars of personal success. And those 3 pillars are sleep, diet, and hygiene. But I know what you're thinking. Will they listen about nutrition and diet to an elderly man with a weight problem? I don't appreciate you thinking that, but I know that's what you were thinking. Then I thought, okay, wait. Maybe I should tell, I've been happily married for 29 years. Maybe I should tell them the secret to a happy marriage. But I can do that in 2 seconds. Secret to a happy marriage is separate bathrooms. That's it. We're done. Okay, let's all go have coffee now. So I thought, no, that's not what I'm going to do. You know, instead, these are my 3 things that still matter. Connections matter. Integrity matters. And trying matters. And folks, hey, after all, I'm 63 now. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to complain, but you'll notice when I said I was 63 that I paused. That was for you to say, no, you couldn't be.
No way.
Instead, I saw a couple of people that were turning to each other and said, I would have guessed a little older, but okay, I'm 63. Okay, here, let's try this again. So anyways, these are the things that still matter, because after all, I'm 63 now.
No.
Oh, no, really, I am. Oh, come on, no. You guys, you're too kind. You're too kind. So that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is these things that matter. When it comes to connections, and when I say that they still matter, what I'm talking about is that I think I'll be able to explain to you that these are three things that when I say they still matter, it's because I think some people think they don't matter. And I want to refute that. When it comes to connections, I'm going to talk a lot about Adams State, because this is the place for connections. Over the years, I've had many visitors to my classes. And I remember one day there was a young woman who was visiting from a large university in Colorado. And I was glad to meet her. I chatted with her a little bit, and then as my students started arriving, I greeted them all by name, asked them how their day was going, their sports, their life, all the things that we talk to our students about on a daily basis. And she was watching this, and her eyes were getting wider and wider, and she started laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" She said at her school, she didn't believe a single one of her professors knew her name. At her school, according to her, she said one of her classes, a biology class, had 1,000 students in it. Is that possible? Is that even physically possible? That's what she said. A few years ago, right here, in the fall, we had the freshman convocation. The common reading experience book for that semester was Skybridge by Laura Pritchett. Well, we were fortunate enough to have Laura Pritchett, an award-winning author, come here and address us during the freshman convocation. And I am proud to say that I had lunch with Laura Pritchett. Laura Pritchett told me she and her husband had been associated with a large Colorado university for 7 years. And this remarkable woman, this intelligent woman, this award-winning woman, in those 7 years had never met the president of that university. The day that I was having lunch with her, she had spent the whole morning with our president. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm saying it's different. I'm saying it's different. Yes, this is my big message to you today. Number one, treat everyone with dignity and respect. Not just people that are richer than you or that you think you can get something from, or people who have some position in life. I mean everyone. I mean when you walk into a grocery store and you want to ask somebody where something is, you treat them with dignity and respect too. And when you're at the cashier, you say, "How's your day going? How's everything going? Are you doing okay?" And you know what? I think you're going to find you get a good return on your investment. Folks, here at Adams State, you are in the best possible place to make connections. Now, I'm addressing this specifically at the students. You have professors here. They are PhDs. They are some of the greatest living experts in their fields. They could be anywhere, but they're here because they like that connection as much as you do. Take advantage of that. The final story I want to tell you in terms of connections. I've got a master's degree from the University of Michigan. As you can imagine, University of Michigan is a pretty big school. My very first day there for my master's degree, I walked in. Now, my master's degree is in Russian and Eastern European studies. So most of my work was master's level work. However, besides that, I was taking a senior level Russian history class. This is a 400 level Russian history class. And I thought, well, gosh, I bet there's only going to be 7 or 8 people in the class. They're going to ask me questions all the time. I'm going to be the dumbest one in the class. It's going to be scary. I showed up the first day with my schedule, walked through the door, and I was in a classroom very similar to this one, except it was about 3 or 4 times as big. Had 200 to 300 students in it. A senior level Russian history class. At the beginning of each class period, Dr. Suni, who later became one of my advisors for my thesis, would walk out to the podium, put his notes down, he would lecture for 50 minutes, he would pick his notes up, and he would leave. Every once in a while, his army of teaching assistants would pass out tests or collect papers. Folks, it's different. And you know what? It is better here. That's my comment on that. Okay, now I know this is a long quote, but there's no area that I worry more than in the area of integrity. And I'm going to read this to you. I know it's long, bear with me. We tend to dwell on measurements, but they tell us very little about the real meaning of life. For that, we must turn to things which cannot be seen or which cannot be measured. To things like honesty, integrity, the strength of conscience, the love for God, service to others, humility, wisdom. These things are invisible. They are beyond measurement, but they comprise life's true wealth. And yes, I did specifically pick this. I love the quote, but also because it is by President Jimmy Carter. And if you've been following the news, you know he's facing some difficult health challenges right now. And I wish him the best. He's a remarkable man. Whatever you might think about him, whether you thought he was a good president or a bad president, fine. I respect your opinion. I think everyone would agree he's a good human being. Well, after something this profound, something this deep, so why do I want to talk about integrity? Because I talk to my students all the time about integrity. And a couple of years ago, in one of my classes, as I was telling the usual pep talk about integrity, there was a young woman in the room. A young woman who played sports for Adams State University. And as I was talking about integrity, she said, "If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying." And it broke my heart. On a similar vein, just a couple of months ago, when the NBA playoffs were going on, they were interviewing one of the players, a professional NBA basketball player. I don't know why, but for some reason they asked him his take on the Tom Brady deflated football scandal. What do you think his answer was? He said, "If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying." Does that worry you at all? Worries me. It worries me. Saw a news story recently. It said 72% of high school students admit to cheating on tests. When I share that with my students, they're surprised. You know why they're surprised? They think the people are lying. They think the number's really much higher. Should we worry about integrity? Does it still matter? Well, I think it does. I think it does. Now I realize there's folks here, we have a lot of people say, well, why should I be the good person? Why should I be the honest person? Why should I do the right thing? Some of us believe we should do it for religious reasons. I'm not going to dwell on that today. I'm going to talk about Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite authors. Kurt Vonnegut was sort of famously anti-organized religion. Kind of outspokenly so. But Kurt Vonnegut wrote extensively about being a humanist and how he defined being a humanist. And by the way, I have to say, I have a book of his letters. There are some reports that later in his life, as he approached his death, that he kind of softened his stance against religion. Who knows? But he said, you know what? We should be honest. We should have integrity. We should do the right thing because it makes the world a better place. Because when we treat each other better, whether we're doing it so that we can go to heaven or we're just doing it to make the world a better place, maybe that's a good enough reason to do it. And I like to think that maybe Kurt had the right idea. Folks, what I want to say to you is, the day that you enter a university classroom, the day that that happens, you're not kids anymore. You are adults. You are men and women of integrity. You are at a crossroad in your life. And this is your chance to make a difference. Folks, you've got to say to yourself, who do I respect and admire? Who do you look up to? Who are the role models that you've set up for yourself in your life? I would suggest to you that it might just be the person who meant what they said, the person who you could trust, the person who you could admire and who you could respect. So is it easy to demonstrate integrity all the time? I would say no, it's not. Let me give you an example of that with another story. I had a group. They came up with a great idea for one of their argumentative essays. They decided that people should, when they go to McDonald's, they would walk up to the counter, they would say, "Hi, I would like a Big Mac, a French fry, and a Diet Coke." The person behind the counter would say, "Oh, okay, sir. Here, please step right over here on this scale. We're going to measure your body mass index." Now you can imagine how I feel about that. Because all I could picture was, I'm going to be at this McDonald's restaurant, I'm going to be hiding outside in the bushes trying to convince people to buy me a Big Mac. But we've got to have integrity. We've got to be honest. So what does that mean? It means if you're not supposed to have a Big Mac, you don't buy a Big Mac. And the last of the three things that I really want to talk to you about today, trying. Do any of you recognize this quote by the noted scholar, Screwface, from Life for Death? What's that? No, Screwface. You're thinking of Scarface from the gangster movie. This is Screwface from Marked for Death. Screwface, who is known as the Jamaican drug lord, but you have to give him credit, he did run a good organization. Hey, so when I talk about trying, why do I want to talk about trying? Well, and this goes back, my wife has been a teacher for years. She's heard this many times. When I was teaching at the high school, I heard it many times. Students that would be talking to each other, and they'd be excited. And do you know what they would say? "I got a C, and I didn't even try." And you know what the ultimate goal was? If you could get a B or an A, but without really trying. Does that seem wrong to you? Would you have more respect for somebody who said, "I got a C, but I did my very best"? Maybe. Maybe so. Maybe so. My wife tells another story when she was teaching 6th grade. Do you know what the worst insult that one student could throw at another student? Schoolboy. What do you think it meant to be a schoolboy? You were a schoolboy if you tried, if you did your work, if you paid attention. Does that sound kind of defeating to you? Wouldn't you rather have somebody say, I'm a schoolboy? And I know I'm being very serious with much of this, so I'll tell you another good story, another good example of trying. 4 young men, they were from an area of Denver where pit bulls are outlawed. These 4 young men did an oral presentation in my class, and they argued that, doggone it, pit bulls are just like any other dog. If they're raised right, they can be sweet, loving, and gentle. And at the end of their presentation, 2 of their friends opened the door in the classroom and released 2 full-grown pit bulls into the classroom. They killed 7 people. No, they didn't kill anybody. That was a joke. What's that? They released the pit bull. The pit bulls ran all over the room. They were licking and slobbering all over people. People were petting them, except for me. I was hiding up in the front. But honestly, do you think they made their case? Do you think they persuaded people that maybe all pit bulls aren't as bad as what people think they are? I always liked that story. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. I like people that try. I look up to people that try. Now, I also say, many of you have been told since you were little, you can be whatever you want to be. And I think that's true, up to a point. I do think you have to have some sense of reality. What I mean by that is, have any of you ever watched American Idol? There was a time when my wife and daughter and I would watch American Idol, and we would actually call in votes. I mean, we enjoyed the show. Well, part of the season of American Idol, part of the early season, is that they have what are called the auditions. And the people that audition frequently are not very good. So they're on there for comic effect. But they would do big elaborate stories about some of these contestants. And they would talk to these contestants. And the contestants would say, I've been singing my whole life. I sing at the church. I sing at the county fair. Whenever my family gets together, they beg me to sing. And they say, really, how would you describe your style? And they say, well, I'm kind of a bluesy mix of Mariah Carey and Beyonce. Then they would walk into the room and stand there and open their mouths, and they couldn't sing a note. And when the judges told them that they stunk, they didn't believe it. This was the first time they'd heard this in their whole lives. So folks, you can be what you want to be to an extent. Try to keep yourself grounded in reality. And I realize that goes against everything you've ever been told, but I'm going to tell you, you are smart enough to succeed. You are smart enough to succeed. I can promise you, when people fail, it is not because they are not smart enough. I say it goes more back to trying. I've talked to many professors here at Adams State. And I say to them, how many people in your classes who really tried have you failed? I frequently get the answer, none. Not that really tried. And I realize there are some tough subjects, and certainly there are people that do their very best and just don't quite do it. But I'm going to tell you, that's the minority of cases. When you go into a class, do you see it as obstacles? I see students every day who say, okay, what do I need to do to get through today? What do I need to do to get through this week? What do I need to do to get through this semester? I want to challenge you to not look at your classes that way. I want you to look at your classes and really say, what can I learn from this? What is the value of me learning this? If I learn this, how will it make it easier for me then to take the next step in my education? Because I promise you, if you apply yourself, if you try, if you really try to learn, every step you take will be easier and easier. You'll be prepared. And all of a sudden, you'll think, I thought this was supposed to be tough. This this is fun. I'm doing great. Now, I'd like to kind of finish tonight by telling one of my favorite stories, because I think it demonstrates how somebody really can try, even when they don't want to, and succeed. Now, to understand this story, I want to go back to my very first semester here, spring of 2006. And back in spring of 2006, believe it or not, we did not have speech instructors here. There were no speech classes at the time. So when we taught 102, not only did people have to do group oral presentations, every single person in the class had to do an individual oral presentation. Well, I'm going to tell you, people hate doing individual oral presentations. I don't know what it is exactly, but every time there is a survey of American adults to find out what their greatest fears are, either number one or number two is public speaking. And so that semester, I actually had a couple of students. I was only teaching 2 classes. They were there every day, solid A students. Right up to the date of the individual oral presentation, they didn't show up, and I never saw them again. For all I know, they're still running today. Now, I'm telling you that story to tell you this one. There was one young lady, and she would not be denied. I could tell from talking to her, she was terrified. She didn't want to do the oral presentation, but she was a good student. She hadn't missed any classes. She had a good grade, and she was going to do it. And so what she did was, she showed up that day. She strode up there to the front of the room, a look of grim determination on her face, and she launched into her presentation. And as she did, her face was frozen in this horrible grin. She was staring at me, and that was not uncommon, because as she was up there presenting, many of the students would stare at me, because I was out there doing the evaluation with the rest of the class, and I would look at her and I would be sending thoughts of love and support. You can do this, you're doing fine, everything's going great. So she was looking at me. Oh, I didn't mention one other thing. She was wearing a long skirt, the kind of skirt that rests on your shoes. And as she was talking, as she was presenting, with that look of frozen horror on her face, staring at me, she was working her hands. Yes, she was rolling up her skirt. As I sat there and looking at her, my first semester, and I said to myself quietly, God, strike me dead now, please. Please don't. Because I didn't know what to do. She had been brave enough to go up front. She was presenting when other people had bailed and run. And she didn't quit. She did it. She was in it. She was going to win. And I just couldn't bear to have her feel the embarrassment. So I sat there and I said, you're doing great. Everything's fine, yes. And she was frozen with her skirt rolled around her waist. And you know what I did? Nothing. I didn't know what to do. And so she finally finished the presentation and kind of looked around and released her skirt and staggered back to her seat. And we had our discussion. And we talked about it, and in that class, and it was a small class, it was my first class, and people talked about, well, what should you do with your hands? Well, what should we do when we're nervous? But nobody broke that girl's heart. And when she left that day, she was a champion. And I do not tell that story to revel in her embarrassment or to make her feel any shame or any embarrassment whatsoever. I tell it because that's a triumph of will. She did it, and I was proud of her. I'm going to tell you, folks, she finished that class. and she got a good grade. So yes, folks, you know what? Connections do matter. You are in the perfect place at the perfect time. Whether you knew you were going to get into this when you came here, or whether you just lucked into it, congratulations, it's your lucky day. Find that professor to look up to. Make friends among your peers. Make connections every day of your life, everywhere that you go. Integrity. You know what, guys? We may laugh about dishonesty. We may watch a reality TV show where the person who stabs people in the back wins, where the person who lies the best wins the big prize. I don't care. I wish I could tell you if you practice integrity, every day of your life will be just a bowl of cherries and you'll be rich beyond all measure. I can't say that. It's still the right thing to do. It still matters. Think of all the people you respect, admire, and look up to. And I think it's going to be the people who have integrity. And finally, do your best. Do your best. Succeed, fail, whatever the case might be, do your best every time, and then brag about it. I tried my best. Yeah, you only got a B. An honest B. A B that I did my best for. And you know what? Here I am at 63. No, I am really. No, that part's true. Really, oh, you guys are too much. I appreciate that.
I'd say you're 20.
What's that?
I'd say you're about 20.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Okay. Folks, and that's really all I wanted to share with you tonight. Thank you very much for your attention.